All right, let's continue our study in the way Tolkien presents virtue in his heroes, and yet does not present them in the way that the pagan world would have presented them, but rather presents a baptized form of virtue. I mentioned last time, I believe, in talking about Dante, that there's a sense given that that the virtues are a stage that takes you so far, and then you hand over to theological virtues. And in some sense, that's true of Dante's portrait. But it's not a full Christian presentation of how the Christian tradition understands virtues, because the notion of everything from justice to courage to temperance to wisdom, etc., is modified by love and by Christian ethics. So we never meet them unbaptized, and it's not sufficient to embrace them the way the pagans do and then just add Christian theology on top of them, as you might take Dante to be saying. And in a sense, the way it's portrayed, I think, is by Dante, has probably created some harm, insofar as it might lead you to think that pagan virtue is sufficient on its own without reinterpreting it in a Christian fashion, because again, Virgil takes Dante up to the top of Mount Purgatory and then hands him off. So it suggests that natural reason takes you so far, and then all you need on top of that is a little bit of Christian icing on the cake. And I don't think that that's correct. And I'm not sure that that's even what Dante means there. But there is certainly a representation of Dante that would regard Virgil as a representation of reason, and reason then, and Dante's own text seems to warrant it to some degree, that the virtues understood in the pagan era are at least in some sense an anticipation of Christian understandings. So not sufficient, but they're leading you up the mountain at least. They just can't take you from the mountain to the sky. And I don't think that's correct. And as I say, Dante's visualization of it for us can be somewhat unhelpful. I think Tolkien sees it better, and I think he sees it in a more Christian fashion in his three books here. And that's what I've been arguing here throughout. And he does it in accordance with his notion of evil to some degree. Remember, evil is the privation of the good. And he was pretty consistent in portraying that, I argued, although I said that there's a realism about it insofar as the more you indulge in evil, the closer you get to it, the more you put it around your neck, the heavier and weightier it seems, the more real, and in fact the more irresistible, the more potent it seems. In fact, it seems to be impossible. So it's not just good versus evil, it's evil actually triumphing over good, which is how the Lord of the Rings actually seems right up until the point when providentially Gollum, having bit off the ring, falls into the cracks of Mount Doom and destroys the ring, just accidentally. But it seems like evil wins. So it's the stronger of the two. But I think that you can argue, and I am arguing, that Tolkien does not conceive the virtues, even here in The Lord of the Rings, in any way other than a Christian fashion. And to some degree, it's in the indictment of the virtues of the men of the West. So though Tolkien himself will argue for just war, just like C.S. Lewis does, and have gone to battle and still believe that the enemy must be physically resisted, he will also see that the person at the opposite side of the lines of battle is nonetheless still a person and deserves some sort of recognition that he is a human being and deserves mercy. And that you, even though you might be on the side of the just, also are not wholly just and also require mercy. And with that understanding going into battle, that it's not good versus evil, it's two sinners, one of whom may be worse in terms of his national, I don't want to say identity, but the cause, what his nation has mobilized itself for, may be a far more unjust cause than the side of the defendant army. But that doesn't mean the defendant army is guiltless. And so there's a need in the midst of all that to limit warfare and to recognize that, again, and Tolkien makes this quite clear, there's no way through virtue to defeat what we're confronting, because what we are confronting here is not flesh and blood. It's not an enemy in that sense. And the ring, the evil of the ring is not confined to the material substance of the ring. Right? Remember, that's just a form. It's a manifestations of the power of its maker. Even Sauron is not destroyed when the ring's destroyed. Evil perdures beyond that, and he'll never, even after that, when he returns, he will never manifest himself in a physical form, but he will be manifested in another form, is at least hinted at. And it may be more insidious even than the physical form, but he will never take another physical form. That he'll take a spiritual threat. And again, that's pointing beyond the book, probably to Christian, the account told in Scripture, where Satan confronts Christ in a different sort of a battle. But here, there is a battle, and it's told to Boromir that he can't defeat Sauron through the traditional virtues of the pagans, which he represents. He is a brave man, and he would, I don't think we're supposed to, it's complex for a contemporary audience to understand what's going on in the story, because we don't think about the subjects in as Christian a fashion as Tolkien does. So I think Tolkien is not as good guys versus bad guys as we, the reader, tend to be. I think that he sees the good guys, including his fellowship, as having many of the same failings as their opponents. And they are their own worst enemies, if you will. That's part of the message of the Lord of the Rings, is the fellowship itself is compromised and can't even trust themselves. And so with that in mind, the quality of mercy which Bilbo extends to Smeagol is vital for the success of the fellowship, but also even for the company themselves. They also deserve mercy and need to show it. So there's a limit on the war that they wage on their opponents. And so he wants to demonstrate that the will to power, which is praised in our day, the indomitable spirit of man, which you hear about all over in movies from Hollywood, is actually a problem. The fact that we will not submit to any authority above our own, and any awareness that we cannot execute the justice that needs to be done, that we cannot will the mercy that needs to be given. It's showing a problem that is in the whole human race, that it needs a savior outside of itself. And I think the Lord of the Rings illustrates that. It's pointing to a need that, for all of its heroism and valor, which is admirably presented, is nonetheless lacking what is essential here. So even though it's cast, when I say it, the book is cast in the deep, dark past in seemingly pagan times, where there is no mention of God even, although that's a funny old pagan times, because all the pagans are worship deities of some sort. So this is a funny form of paganism. When people say Tolkien's a medievalist and he's presenting medieval people, there's sort of knight chivalrous virtues, etc. yes and no, because again, there is no Middle Ages, certainly no Christian Middle Ages, where there's no mention of God, but even the pagans will mention deities. Think of the Greek and Romans. They appeal to the gods all the time. Not here, though. So it's a very unpagan book in that sense. But what it discloses is also very unpagan, which is that heroism itself is dangerous. And one of the illustrations was in the feminine form that I mentioned last time, Eowyn, who represents a very brave woman, valorous, willing to die, and willing to throw her life away. And part of us admires that, but I don't think Tolkien wants us to admire it. We're supposed to think that there's something wrong with her, and something broken that needs to be repaired. And I left off last time by talking about how that transpires in the Houses of Healing, where she and Faramir are restored to health and to a life that they can live together. But before that, she's a broken woman. And so her heroism is more what Aristotle would talk about as recklessness, pursuit of vainglory, and a negligence of duty, ironically. She leaves behind those that she's charged to protect. Very rash act. So what Tolkien's portraying here then is that the things that we associate with heroes, the willingness to get it done, and not let any obstacle get in our way, is part of the evil side of what we attribute to heroism. Now, what's also interesting in the whole portrait, the fellowship, the two towers, the Return of the King, is that there is no delight in killing their own kind, which we do see in the pagan epics. There's no delight in human beings killing other human beings, elves killing elves, dwarves killing dwarves, etc. It's only the fellowship's delight in killing its opponents that is shown, and it's shown without any blushing. They take great delight in destroying evil. But how is evil portrayed? Again, go back to what we said about the portrait of evil. It's the privation of the good. So it's an attack on sin to some degree, and the consequences of sin. That's what they're animated by. They hate evil. And they're allowed to hate their opponents precisely because there's a privation of good. It's the privation of the good that they hate in them. And even when they, in the most insidious and threatening form of that, in the form of Gollum, Gandalf praises mercy, right? Because this is a despicable creature. He deserves to die. Gandalf admits he deserves to die, and yet he still recommends mercy to be shown to him. So this is a denial of what normally would be seen as justice. The justice that Gollum deserves is death. He explicitly says that, but we're not going to give him what he deserves. We're going to show him mercy. This is a Christian assessment by a non-Christian character. No pagan would ever say what Gandalf says, ever. In fact, it would be unjust not to kill the creature. And that's exactly what Faramir does as well when he decides to let him go. Remember, they go into the caves or the pool with the hidden pool, and the law is that anybody who goes into this deserves to die, and I must administer it, or I am guilty of a grave injustice. And he nonetheless decides to let Frodo and the creature go, again showing mercy. And seeing mercy as the path forward. And this is the wisdom of Faramir. And it's not the world's wisdom, and it's not the world's notion of justice. It's that mercy is greater than justice, or that a sort of justice is done through the act of mercy. A very Christian take on justice. And it points to the cross, right? where there's an unwarranted grace demonstrated for those who deserve the punishment that Christ takes upon himself. And we see this, that even the creatures that we call evil are good creatures that have been somehow deceived by evil. They've been duped, and yet there's a goodness that remains in them in spite of that. And we see that Tolkien's heroes repeatedly show them mercy in a way that would not be reciprocated. So there's no, again, two sides in a combat acknowledging the rules of combat. One is pitiless and would destroy them all. It's wholly representative of a sort of notion of evil, that is bent on power and bent on destruction. The other side has to be irresistible in its commitment to stop it, but at the same time will not use all ends to defeat the enemy. It will not do an unjust thing, which is why, again, in the film version of The Lord of the Rings, in the Return of the King, when Aragorn rides to the Black Gate with all the forces and speaks to the mouthpiece of Sauron, who's a hideous creature, admirably, despicably portrayed, and he swings around and cuts off his head, turns his back, and then swings around, cuts off his head. There's a sort of, yeah, we got him there. No hero would ever do this. It's a despicable act. It's treachery. No, Aragorn would never do that. It's not there in the book. You would not turn your back on your opponent and then swing around and take his head off. Not acceptable. Ends do not justify the means. It's terrible. It's sort of, it's degrading. And then the great speech about, human empowerment and stuff at the end, it's just, no, you've totally missed the point. This is a bad, it doesn't seem like it because everybody's happy that the mouthpiece of Sauron loses his head, but it's a despicable act. But the orcs and the fighting Uruk-hai have been created by Sauron and other beings, and they are in their nature perverted. They're not good things that are perverted. The creation process was perverted with perverse ends in mind. And for that reason, the fellowship fights without restraint. They feel that a foul spirit falls upon them, and they fall into a sort of a battle lust, the lust of battle, which is talked about in the pagan epics, like Beowulf. A spirit falls upon them, the bloodlust, and they take great joy in mowing down their enemies, which is portrayed in the films, but it's not portrayed rightly because the evil is not portrayed rightly. So the typical way that Christians portray this is to love the sinner and hate the sin. You've heard that said. And how do you do that? It's a very difficult thing to do. So to some degree, it's using every physical means at your disposal to stop the threat, while at the same time realizing it's not a physical battle. And ultimately showing mercy when mercy is not deserved. So you think about the horrible Grima Wormtongue and the effect of that horrible being who leads Éowyn to despair and leads Theoden in such a deep depression that he almost loses his kingdom, and is intent on betraying him to Sauron for the purposes of getting a better deal out of it. A total traitor. And in any country, a traitor on this magnitude deserves immediate death. Dante would put him at the very pit of hell. A treachery of that sort. How does King Theoden deal with him? He leads his army in a fury to defeat their enemies, but when it comes to Grima, he tells him that he can come down. And he tells him to leave Sauron, and he promises him that he won't avenge himself upon him. He shows him great mercy, in other words. This is the traitor of the whole kingdom, and he's lost how many men in that battle at Helm's Deep? Huge numbers. Almost destroys his own people, and yet he shows him mercy. So it's the same thing over and over. Now again, treachery is the worst form of sin, at least in Dante's estimation. So you need a right understanding of what constitutes a just war and the limits on your use of physical force. And one of the limits is just the self-awareness that those that you are fighting are just given over to a greater degree of the very thing that you suffer from. So by showing them mercy, you're demonstrating that you realize that you need mercy. Again, that's not a pagan awareness at all, not even remotely. What does Faramir say? He says, "For myself, I would see the white tree, which once grew in the citadel of Gondor as its chief emblem, in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace. Minas Anor again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens, not a mistress among many slaves, nay, not even a kind mistress of willing slaves. War must be, while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour us all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Numenor, and I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom, nor feared, save as men may fear the dignity of a man old and wise." So, you fight because of what you love that you're defending, not because you hate what's in front of you. It's that sort of, I'm defending the good. I'm not hating the evil, I'm defending the good. I love the good, I love the true, I love the beautiful, I love the wise. This is what I seek to preserve. So that, to that end, the virtues of the fellowship are pointed. It's to uphold the good, the true, the beautiful, the just, etc., and to seek to preserve it. And so in a sense, they have to hate the evil, of course, but that's not the motivation. The motivation is very crucial. Because if they do evil things for evil motives, then what distinguishes themselves from their opponent? And the answer is nothing. And as I say, Aragorn, when he cuts off the head of the mouthpiece of Sauron, totally contradicts the character of the king of Gondor. And when Frodo, after he's destroyed the ring, we're told that he will no longer even wield a sword, which is an interesting response. He doesn't forbid others from doing so, but he himself will not. And why? Because it's an awareness of his failure. I think that's what it is. What does it say? It says, Frodo had been in the battle, but he had not drawn sword, and his chief part had been to prevent the hobbits in their wrath at their losses from slaying those of their enemies who threw down their weapons. So the hobbits are on my side. They are uprooting the injustice, undoing the evil that's been done, but I'm going to be here to keep them from committing more atrocities in the name of justice. That would not be just. Comments or questions? Can't you see that this is how Tolkien is portraying it? So I began by talking about the similarities between Tolkien's approach and his love of the Beowulf and the pagan chivalry and the way that things are portrayed here. But don't mistake him to be saying the same things that Beowulf is. He's saying more than that and doing more than that. And again, in the context of the 20th century, seems to be speaking to that context as well. The limitations, like think about a world war, what that entails. Like everybody in on it, the whole of a nation, all on board. It's total war. there's no civilians and armies. The armies are out there, but the civilians are behind them, supplying them, and everything is in the direction of propaganda to make sure the enemy is defeated. Tolkien seems to be saying something about how Christian truth can penetrate that idea that our opponent needs to be destroyed at all costs. So some have thought that this is a commentary on the atom bomb in Japan and that sort of thing, and I don't think so. That would be an illustration maybe of a problem, but it's certainly not about that, and Tolkien explicitly says it's not. That's not right. I'm not writing about the atom bomb. The ring is not the atom bomb. Let me talk about courage. We talked about prudence. We talked about justice. I just talked about justice in the context of just war and the need for mercy and so forth. Prudence and justice are very much, you can imagine them in spiritual terms. They have to do with the mind. They have to do with the spirit. They have to do with intentions. They have to do with abstract things in some ways, right? Justice and again, temperance. It's a spiritual exercise. Whereas courage and temperance are more bodily, more explicitly, obviously so. This is a quote from G.K. Chesterton. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die. For a pagan, courage is manifested when you die in battle for a just cause. That's what courage is. So you honor the dead because they were willing to lay down their lives. But in the Christian world, it's not so. In the Christian world, it's the willingness to be a martyr for the truth, which means that living in a way that would not deny Christ in word or in deed or in thought. Or even a refusal to kill others just to save your own life. There's a sort of a sign. A martyr is a sign. That's what a martyr means, right? There's a sort of a sign. What is my value on life? It's shown in how I treat other people's lives. So this is why blowing up clinics or killing abortionists in the name of a pro-life cause is a contradiction in terms. This is a contradiction of your own ethics. You can't do that. So it's a refusal to love our lives so much that we lose our souls in the process. More harm is done to a pro-life cause by employing the means of the opponents than anything else, because it does exactly that. It's no longer a sign. It's no longer a witness, and the witness is the key. It's a battle over truth and so forth. So courage is a refusal to commit sin just because of a fear, and a fear of defeat. Chiefly, I would rather lose the battle than commit the sin that I'm accusing others of. And again, the fellowship at the end, when they draw up to the Black Gate to draw out the armies of Sauron, they have every sense that they are going to lose. They have no reason to believe that Frodo is going to succeed, and what is going to happen does happen. They have no sense of that. They think that they're going to lose. And again, this is where I take issue with the film. I'm taking away all my points when I'm discussing the film. Aragorn says that they're not going to lose this day. We're going to fight, and somehow we're going to win. That's not there that's not in the book. They have no sense that they're going to. He goes there to lose, with every expectation that what we'll do is we'll draw him out, but not that we're not going to lose this day. So pull out your swords and fight. Stand, men of the West. Nonsense. It's not in the book. It sounds great, and you get to go show these guys and the sounds of swords coming out and the horses going up, and this is fantastic, right? And we run into about whatever. Not so. They are going to face up to evil with no sense of victory at hand, but they're still going to do the right thing. So how is this presented in the Lord of the Rings? Well, it is presented, that is, courage in various pagan ways. And one of them that's more amusing is the contest between Legolas and Gimli, when they're counting, how many have I killed? 39, 40, whatever, and, so, okay. When same episode, Aragorn climbs the walls of Helm's Deep and stands up on top of them and defies the orcs. This is bravado. This is traditional pagan courage being manifested. Go ahead, take your best shot. We love it. I love it anyway. I'll say, sure, right? I love that stuff. But there are that sort of pagan virtue, which everybody loves, I think, is naturally admirable, is juxtaposed and to some degree supplemented by a courage of a very different sort. As I say, so in the battle in front of the White Tower, Pelennor Fields, Theoden comes over the hill with a charge. Oh no, hold on, this is in Helm's Deep. He does the same thing, but when he finally rides out with Aragorn at the Battle of Helm's Deep, he thinks he's going to lose. It's not, we'll go out because it's the 5th day. For some reason they forget that. They forget the time. Let's ride out, and rather than be caught in here and die, let's go out and go down in a blaze of glory. Like 2 gunfighters going out. You can imagine it. It's sort of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid will run out and then eventually, sure, you get mowed down. But okay, but what a good way to go. But there are other sacrifices of the sort that are laying down their lives. So right before the Black Gate, so here's what is said in the book rather than what's said in the movie. Gandalf says that we need a very unprudential kind of courage, one that's not really wise by the world's standards. And he says this: prudence would counsel you to strengthen such strong places as you have, and there await the onset. I do not counsel prudence. So what does he say? Should we go take the fight to the enemy, or should we stay here behind? Let's stay here behind. That would be what prudence says, because that will delay the defeat that must come inevitably. We can hold our defenses for a long time, just like at Helm's Deep. That's the prudent thing to do. We will not be destroyed. We may be able to hold out for years. He does not counsel prudence. I do not counsel prudence, he adds. I said victory could not be achieved by arms. I still hope for victory, but not by arms. So he counsels, ride out, but not for victory. Again, this is why Aragorn's speech would be so ludicrous after that. So Gandalf says, let's go out and we're going to get whooped. And then Aragorn, I'm here, so everything's going to be okay. It would contradict what Gandalf said, and he never does that. So what Gandalf calls them to do is give them up to a power greater than theirs to defeat a power that is greater than theirs. The power greater than theirs is also greater than their enemies, is the idea. We can't even see it. There is no, it's sort of like in the battle with Hezekiah, when the armies of the Lord surround the Assyrian, right? They can't see them. We're surrounded. We cannot win. And Elijah or Elisha that sees something a little different. That's what's going on here, except that Gandalf doesn't see anything. He doesn't see the forces of light surrounding the forces of darkness. He just hopes. He has a hope in him, which points to a power which he dimly believes in. He believes in it, but he can't see it. He's never seen the Valar. But he knows that there is a force there that is greater than this force. And that's what's brought the whole company to where it is. So a sense of providential ordering. And this is because he hopes that, again, Sam and Frodo have got to where they were sent. This is not the same as being fearless. So let's talk about this. Courage and fearlessness are not the same thing. If you have no will to live, and therefore you're not afraid of death, you're not courageous. Éowyn is the illustration of that. She's not afraid to die because she doesn't want to live. That's not courageous. She's willing to throw her life away because she wants to die. She's already dead in spirit. It leads her to a recklessness. Not to be admired, and we are not supposed to admire her. Again, the film makes a hatchet job of this. It sort of has to. And again, you've got the feminists there pulling out, I'm not a man, I'm a woman, I'm a man. Okay. I don't have a problem with the spectacle. I have a problem with the motivation for character and the distortion of the way in which Tolkien presents them. But again, that wouldn't play very well if you want more female heroes to have one of your few female heroes be deficient in the greatest way. That doesn't play very well in a Hollywood movie. But anyway, but being suicidal and being willing to blow yourself up is not courage. A suicide bomber is not courageous. And if they are a martyr, they're not a martyr for Christ. By the way, in terms of church history, at the time when the Romans were persecuting the Christians and killing them, the early church forbade the pursuit of martyrdom. You're not supposed to pursue it. Don't put yourself out there so you're going to get killed. It's not glorifying God to throw away your own life willingly. That's actually despair. That's the wrong motivation. But they are actually afraid of Sauron, and that needs to be also said. It's not that they don't fear him; they do fear him. Even Gandalf fears him. But they fear the Lord more, is the point. They fear the power of the good. Interestingly, not stated in that exact form, but they are motivated by something other than the fear of Sauron. There's something that they have willingly allied themselves to, whom they will not betray. And that's a sort of a fear. Christians will call it filial fear as opposed to servile fear. Filial fear is what a son shows towards a father who loves him and who he loves in return and doesn't want to betray him. Servile fear is what a servant has for a master whom he does fear and also hates. The fellowship is not motivated by hate. But the fear of what is good, true, beautiful, just is the real motivation for courage and the real beginning of wisdom. Actually, that's what Augustine says in De Doctrina Christiana, is the beginning of the pursuit of wisdom begins with fear. It just fear of a different sense. It's more fear motivated by love. So it doesn't have the same appearance to us. So I mentioned the false bravado of Éowyn. Who is infuriated because she can't act like a man and like a warrior and lay down her life, whom Tolkien is not commending to us as the path, and it's not that he's a misogynist, it's because he is condemning a sort of hopelessness that leads to recklessness and embitteredness. But also in the instance where Sam is bereft of his master. Remember when Frodo gets stung by Shelob and he thinks that Frodo's dead. And then he has choices before him. The choices of Samwise Gamgee, I think is the title of the chapter. And he has three choices. Either he can take the ring that's around Frodo's neck and carry it to Mount Doom alone. Or he can go after Gollum, who betrayed him. He betrayed his master and led to this outcome. Or he can just take his own life. Let me do what my master did. This would have been done in the ancient world. My master died, now I die. I'll take my own life at the sorrow, demonstrating the sorrow. The passage says this: he looked on the bright point of the sword. He thought of the places behind where there was a black brink and an empty fall into nothingness. So he's contemplating suicide. You can imagine that at this point. He's on his own. He's not the ring bearer. The ring bearer is dead. He is in the land of Mordor. What is he going to do? How can he possibly do what his master could fail to do? So what should he do? He's furious with Gollum, so maybe go after him. So he's faced with the same sort of choice that Aragorn had when Frodo and Sam left his company. Do we go after and look after our friends? Do we pursue, what exactly do we do here? So a moment of prudential wisdom, and he chooses rightly. It would appear sort of courageous to take his own life, maybe, but obviously it would be an act of cowardice, desperation. It would thwart the whole commitment to everything the master stood for, because Frodo was willing to go to the very end. And so to just take away his own life at that point would be admit defeat, but willingly do so. So it would be the worst act of cowardice imaginable. You have a comment?
Yeah, I just have a question. It's sort of related.
Please.
So I noticed how in the books Samwise refers to Frodo as master.
Yep.
But in the movie he refers to him as Mr. Frodo.
Yeah.
A significance there?
Yeah, it's an American audience, and they don't like the connotations of a master, is my sense. They're the UK. The great problem in the UK, at least from the vantage point of the left, is class hierarchy. In the US, it's slavery, racism. I think that just the term master has connotations that they're sort of trying to step around. But the motivation from a Christian point of view, the language of master is sort of useful. Sam is not Frodo's slave. He's his friend, but he acknowledges that he is a servant to him, and he sees himself uplifted by that idea of servanthood, which is, I think, rather helpful. And he wants to retain that, and Tolkien does retain it in his book, the idea of being in service of a master. Everyone will be happy to acknowledge, everyone Christian will be happy to acknowledge Jesus as their master. But does that mean there's no earthly manifestations of that? For Tolkien, no, it doesn't mean that. You can have a proper ruler over you, whether it's a father, or if it's a king, or if it's a pastor, church leader. So there are certain hierarchies that are there for your good, and you are under their care and protection, and you're there to serve the people serving you. They're supposed to serve you as well. That's the Christian notion of service, then, of leadership, right? You have servant leaders. You serve the servant leaders in return. How do you serve them? Well, you serve them with service, with obedience. That's what's being illustrated here. When he just calls him Mr. Frodo, it's like, this is pretty weak sauce. It flattens everything down. Yeah, anyway, because I don't want to be too hard on the films, but yeah, I mean, even he's Americanized it. I say that unfortunately, it's not just the Americans that see it that way, but they want to make everything equal. It doesn't really work there in the context of the book either. So yes, the choice that Samwise Gamgee has. Yes, he could throw away his life, but his real calling is to carry on the quest. He was one of the 9. He's the last one left. He was not even supposed to be there. And he committed himself to go with Frodo to the end. Well, Frodo's dead, but the purpose of that was not to be with Frodo, but to go to the end. He has to recognize that. It's to destroy the ring. He's the last one standing, as far as he knows. And he chooses to do exactly that. And I'll read the second. He said, "Certainly the ring had grown greatly in power," Sam ruefully reflects, "as it approached the places of its forging. But one thing it did not confer, and that was courage." He's wearing the ring. It doesn't make him feel any more courageous. He is just as fearful as before. So it gives you a power, but it doesn't give you courage. In the pagan world, defending the body of your master is a huge virtue. It's huge. Especially in the north. Tolkien's much beloved Norse sagas, the servants that will stand over their masters and protect them are highly valued. Frodo abandons the body. Sam abandons his master's body, which is contemptible. He doesn't even bury him. It's not a good thing. Like from the vantage point of a pagan, this is a terrible thing to do. You leave your master's body. But he makes the choice, and he makes the choice not out of contempt for his master, but for his love of what the master stood for. And even the master, he thinks, would have approved of this. I don't think that's ever reflected in the language there, but that's the sense there. Frodo would understand why he did what he did. And here's but when he thinks about that, he first goes off, and then he realizes what he's done by leaving his master, and he turns back. And he says this, he says, "He flung the quest and all his decisions away, and fear and doubt with them. He knew now where his place was, and had been at his master's side, though what he could do there was not clear." And then, of course, he turns back and he finds out, to his surprise, Frodo isn't dead. Shock, horror. It was out of a commitment to him. And again, not the higher cause of destroying the ring even then at that point, but it's sort of a commitment to the people around him. In this case, his master. It prompts him to do the right thing. And then he says this, "You fool, he isn't dead, and your heart knew it. Don't trust your head, Samwise. It's not the best part of you. The trouble with you is that you never really had any hope." He says this to himself. So again, this is Tolkien speaking to his readership about motivations in all sorts of situations. So it's very much of an epic narrative in that sense. He's schooling us in true virtue, which is situational. What's the right thing to do here? And he's illustrating it in the mouths of the heroes that we're following here. How do I act in this situation? And then that ends up going from despair to a sort of hopeful endurance of the suffering that ensues. I won't talk about that. I understand, not that I follow this because I have no time anyway to do this, but I understand that Stoicism is on the rise in our culture. A lot of, on YouTube and so forth, people praising and promoting Stoicism. which is a very admirable school of philosophy in certain ways, for sure, because they model everything that our culture does not model, which is patience and perseverance, and a way of dealing with suffering. The Stoics model that, and we're no good at that. We avoid suffering at all costs, which is despicable. And when we do see it, we see people wailing like babies in public and so forth. It's just, again, despicable. No higher virtue than self-expression at all times. Terrible. But there's a difference between Stoical patience and the Christian patience that I think Tolkien's commending here. The Stoics brave the world because they don't think things can be any different than they are. Remember, they live in a fatalistic world. And so if you're gonna suffer, take it like a man. What's the difference? Right? It's gonna happen anyway. Don't lose your dignity. And so the one thing that you are doing then is you're mastering your soul. You're not allowing your soul to become a part of the world. You're detaching yourself, in a sense, from everything around you. So what if your wife betrays you? So what if your best friend dies of cancer? So what? That is a terrible thing. But worse still would be to be broken over it. So detach yourself from everything worldly, from everyone, so you don't love anything too much. That's the Stoic solution. If you don't love things too much, you can't be broken when those things betray you. So you pull back, stiff upper lip. You never love anything too much, therefore you're not committed to it, and therefore you retain your equanimity. That's what they would call it. Your even spiritedness, even souledness in that situation. Christian endurance is very much differently motivated, because it is motivated by a hope of something better than your situation will betray to you is there. It's motivated by hope. And it's also motivated by a sense of joy that you've already partaken of. Grace unspeakable, or joy unspeakable and full of glory. Right? You've already known that, and you expect it, even in the contradiction of it in the life around you, with the cancer diagnosis or the betrayal. Yet there's something in you that hopes for more. And Jesus says of his disciples that the one that persists to the end will be saved. And it's Jesus' motivation for doing what he did as well. So in Hebrews, it says that Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame. For the joy set before him. So he's motivated by something greater. And what was he facing? He knew he was facing the cross. So there's no avoiding it. It's not that he's avoiding. He's going to face the worst thing any person could ever face. Not the cross, because many people died on the cross in Roman era, but being cut off from the Father. No one had ever been cut off from the Father. No one. But Jesus was going to be, and he knew that was coming. And yet he knew that there was a better hope beyond that. And he for the joy, out of motivation for the good, the true, the beautiful, for God, for his sake, he scorned the shame, endured the cross, endured persecution, affliction, etc. And that's what is commended in the Lord of the Rings as well. So rejoicing in our sufferings. And they're determined to, and this is what marks Frodo and Sam, I think, more than any of the other characters, because remember, they represent the priestly function of Christ here. They are going to see it through. They're going to endure it to the end. In fact, Sam keeps saying it. We're going to see it through, and you almost hear the gritted teeth. But it's not stoic gritted teeth. It's because there's a good worth fighting for. Right? It's not, we just got to suffer this. There's a good, and it's worth fighting for, and the good will reward. That's what lies behind it. Everyone knows it. Pippin, when he thinks he's about to be killed, all he says, well, I'll just do my best. When Frodo and Sam think that they're going to fail in their quest, Frodo still says, still we have to try. It's no worse than I expected. I never hoped to get across. I can't see any hope of it now. But I've still got to do the best I can. So nothing present in front of them which leads them to believe that they're going to succeed. Nothing. There's nothing there. Never thought they could succeed. But I've still got to do my best. So they're motivated by the good in the face of an obvious impossibility. I've still got to do it. And that pushes them on. It's a different motivation. And they're willing to suffer. And they demonstrate the suffering. They're not going to shy away from it. So it's not stiff upper lip stoicism, pretend it's not happening. Detach themselves from every good. It's out of a commitment to the good, press on. Yes?
It seems like in the, again, kind of like to draw the contrast between the movie and the book, the only reason I draw attention to that is because of the visual aspect.
Absolutely, yep.
Is that in the movie it seems like their hope is based off of a present good, which is like the Shire, for example.
Right, yeah, so you get an image and they show it on the screen and yeah.
Right. That's what the good is represented as, whereas in the book it seems, and I guess this leads me to my question, although they haven't seen the LOTR or any of the beings that came before, is Tolkien saying that, is this like a Imago Dei thing where they know, like, because again, I don't know, what gives them that sense that there is something good they're fighting for?
In the books it doesn't seem like it's the Shire, right? No. It's not evoked in the same way, and the filmmaker does it because that's all he's got to play with. So, and in a sense, the Shire is portrayed in the film in a way it isn't in the book. In the book, it's a corrupted place. I don't think you get that in the movie. In the movie, you think it's some sort of a idyllic, natural state.
Yeah, it's Eden.
Oh, it's Eden. It is absolutely that, but it's not. It's corrupted. The hobbits are portrayed to be corrupt. I don't think that comes across in the film again, because again they want to portray good and evil in a certain way. But the hobbits are themselves corrupted in many ways. They're given over to the silly things that we mock them. Well, that's a sign of their corruption, among other things. Yes, you're right. And so because he portrays that as an unambiguous goodness, Peter Jackson, when they want to portray the good that's motivating them, that's the thing he can already point to. Oh, the Shire. Yeah, that was the good. But that's not how the book portrays it, because first of all, the Shire is never that good. It's just as corrupt as every other place. Evil has insinuated itself so that the hobbits are, in some ways, are contemptible. But yes, he never says what the good is then. And you just have a sense of it. And that's what makes these hobbits, Frodo and Sam and Pippin and Merry, better than the other hobbits. See, they're not like the other hobbits. The other hobbits despise them for leaving and don't understand their motivations. It's not very hobbit-like for you to do what you're doing. And same with the men. Aragorn is the betrayal of the men. The people in the Fellowship are against their own people, in the sense their own people despise what they're doing. They think it's a stupid thing to do. They don't approve of it. And they don't do it for them, strictly speaking, although they love what is good in them, but what is good in them is insufficient. So Aragorn loves the White Tower, and he would not see it fall. And he says that he will be with him there, and he will not let their people fail, whatever it says in the film. So he loves what's good in it, but there's not very much that's good in it anymore. Still, there's something, and he's going to defend it. But it's the motivation of the love of the good, and the love of the good is not in the Shire, and it's not in the White Tower of Gondor or any of that. Note that the White Tower of Gondor is so gone down so far that the tree doesn't even grow anymore. The white tree, it doesn't grow there anymore. It's a sign of bad times. We're in a bad state. likewise, all over, the elves, the dwarves, they are fallen on wicked times. And so they can't just stick around. Even the elves, they want to stick around and in their holy huddle in Rivendell or whatever, and let's just wait around here until the end of things. And they're motivated to do something selfless. Remember the good old days? Why don't you go back and do that again? Or you can flee, but you can't stay here. And so they move outside of themselves, motivated by a good that they no longer possess. That's the motivation for all of them. It's sometimes it's implicit, sometimes it is actually explicit though, but it is the motivator for all the goodness that happens as the plot device. One of the things that's in the books that's not in the movies is the use of poetry and song, which points to a good of the past that they don't have in the present. That's why they're singing the song to some degree. It's a good old song, but it's about the old song is about a good old hero who did a thing that was so extraordinary that everyone remembers it, and me included, I remember it, and I'm going to sing it. And they cheer themselves with that poetry and the legends of the figures that did deeds that were so great that others remember them. And that's an appeal, again, to the presence of figures greater than they have around them, to motivate them to greater deeds than they themselves are capable of, which is one of the reasons I think we should read the great books. I think there's a goodness there that our current generation most certainly does not possess, and otherwise we wouldn't even know about it, or think that it was possible to be anything other than contemptible like our age is. How would we imagine it could be different if we couldn't imagine that it was different? Or know that it had been, or have the example of those who lived in dark days and lived in better ways. So the hobbits are cheered by the legends of the past, and sometimes will laugh and cheer themselves with it. And they respond to goodness in that way. And the goodness does not, even in the middle of Mordor, they find vestiges of goodness. Just little oases in the desert, and it's sort of like the lembas, the bread that sustains them. These little oases in the midst of the desert that have not yet been totally extinguished by evil, like the water that they find in Ithilien, which refreshes them and brings them to joy and to jesting and laughter and cooking. Cooking is a sign, by the way, of civilization. So when Samwise brings his utensils to cook with, and even a little bit of spice, it's to remind him of something where they're not reduced to the state of nature. Whereas Gollum can't even eat cooked food. He wants raw meat. And it's not because he's a noble savage. It's because he's a degraded character. He can't even stomach it. He spits it out. He wants it raw and wriggling, alive, biting in his teeth. It's well done. But why is that? Again, it's because of the effect of civilization, which is good. It seemed to be good, portrayed as such. No other animal, by the way, cooks its food. Let me conclude with temperance, because I want to finish with the virtues as much as I don't. I do. So temperance. Now temperance, it can be easily misunderstood to be just simply moderation. Have a little water with your wine, says the Apostle Paul to Timothy. Have a little bit of water with that wine. It's moderation. Don't drink too much. That's a sort of a moderation. That is more of a Stoic sense of moderation again. Moderation is pushed in pretty much every spiritual system that I know of, religious one as well. Stay not too much of this, not too much of that. Wise counsel in general, I would say. But it's usually connected with the vice of excess, too much drinking, too much eating, too much sex, inappropriate ways, in various ways, right? So that's the excess. Don't indulge in that. The opposite of that can be total renunciation of those things. That's what you get in the Corinthian church. They lose the sense of propriety. They have sex outside of marriage, etc. And they get involved in all sorts of ascetic practices, but then also indulgent practices if there's no natural limit on that or there's no commandment on this. So temperance, that in those cases, deals with a sort of contempt for the flesh, but not from the Christian vantage point. From the Christian vantage, it's to cultivate a right regard for the body and the soul. How do I think about these things and act accordingly to recognize the good of the body and the end towards which it's been created? And how is that presented then? The New Testament talks about it in terms of sobriety, which we connect with drinking, obviously, but it is connected more strongly with the passions in general. So here's the quote from Titus 2:11 and 12. "For the grace of God has appeared for the salvation of all men, training us to renounce irreligion and worldly passions, and to live sober, upright, and godly lives in this world." So it's a positive discipline. It's not negative, we don't do this, but how do we rightly do these things? So to preserve and perpetuate ourselves and take good delight in good things. And here's the danger. Because the good things are good things and are divinely ordained, they can be dangerous. And we saw that with Lewis in Eros Unbaptized. So love, in that sense, is a great good. However, untempered, it is a terrible goddess, just like Galadriel would be. So they need the true thing that makes it what it is needs to be brought out. Now, in terms of love, we already have seen that Lewis talks about this repeatedly in the sense that agape love has to temper eros and philia and storge. So erotic love, friendship love, and familial love. That's the tempering effect is that of divine love, agape or charity. How does it work itself out in the other virtues? Well, again, it's moderated by agape love, I would submit to you. And not to do so is to exercise what Augustine calls a servile liberty. So there is a sort of liberty which is servile, which doesn't recognize the right purposes of things. This is where the libertarians go wrong. Libertarians think whatever I choose, that's my good, because I choose it. If that's the case, then there's no difference between choosing death or choosing life. It's just it's the choice that makes it the good. In which case, it's a liberty that serves me, but no other good. So it's servile in the sense that it is not motivated by love, other than my own love of myself. The Christian doctrine repeatedly denies that our bodies are the cause of our sin. And we saw that Tolkien embraced this in his portrait of evil. It's not a physical manifestation, right? It's a privation of the good, but it's not, there's a bad thing, per se. But Frodo and Sam are going to manifest their conquest over this by the way they deal with their desires. How shall I look at this? But I mean, the problem with the hobbits is that they are given over to lust, particularly for food. 6 meals a day, 6 square meals a day. And then when you're done, there's still a little bit of there's a corner there that I haven't filled. Let me tuck that away there. So they have great delight in the senses, which I think, again, leads others to rejoice in them. But although, remember last time I mentioned, I was in the hallway afterwards, when Saruman has been brought down, and the hobbits are sitting there feasting in the ruins of the tower, eating and drinking and smoking, while all around them it's a ruin. And while the others are off fighting and so forth, take such delight. Well, this is a sign of disordered character, really. I mean, it's funny, but it's still. And the others who love them, I think, what is it? They called rascals. Sure. But they are rascals still. This is not the way you behave in this situation. Anyway. The hobbits are very happy to give into the pleasures there, and they always want to know when supper is going to be served. Right? So very, very much motivated by the lust of the flesh. But for all of that, we can see that Samwise, who is the most committed to this because he's the cook, etc., is the one that's able to endure food, a life without food, to the point where he gives his food to Frodo. Right? He gives his food over to him because, again, he recognizes that there's a good beyond that of his own flesh. And he gives it to his master, who ends up still collapsing, but for a different reason, not because he didn't have any food. He had Sam's food, the remnants of it. So they're motivated once again by a sort of asceticism, a self-denial, denial of the body, but therefore a spiritual reason. Same thing that the lembas bread does. It has a virtue in it, it's said. And this abandonment of his body gives him a greater moral strength. Quote, Sam's plain hobbit face grew stern, almost grim, as the will hardened in him, and he felt, through all his limbs, a thrill, as if he was turning into some creature of stone or steel, that neither despair, nor weariness, nor endless barren miles could subdue. So he becomes the instrument of God's grace, if you will, in the story, by doing this. Now, note the phrase there. He was turning into a creature of stone or steel, that neither despair, nor weariness, nor endless barren miles could subdue. Compare that to Saruman, who Treebeard says has a mind of metal, and has none of the virtues of it. He has a mind of metal, but he has no character that goes with it. So they're almost antitheses. One goes to the one extreme of getting power and willing to destroy all life to gain it, Saruman, and then Samwise the exact opposite, who becomes tough and steely in his resolution and able to do things that are impossible for him to do. He has spiritual strength. He's the illustration of this. And they walk up Mount Doom in a sort of, I think, an analogy to Golgotha, Christ, the place of the skull. And they experience a terrible dark path there, where they really seem to have lost all things that would avail people there. And they don't even have lembas bread left in the end. There's nothing left sustaining them, and so that they do actually fail. Yeah, a couple minutes. So that's the way in which the hobbits, through their commitment to, what did I call it? Temperance. Avoid the lusts of the flesh. How about the lust of the eye? Here, this one's really important. We see it in two places, well, multiple places actually, but through the seeing stones is one of them, but a better one, and and in Galadriel's mirror. But the best illustration is in Denethor, the wise Denethor, who sees the future. And he really sees the future. And he is filled with a sort of a visual lust, which assumes that it knows everything because it can see with his own eyes. The great danger of the media in our day is that it provides images and people believe what they see. And it will even lead them to believe that somebody who acts in a certain way that's against their character did it because they can see it with their own eyes. It appears to be so. ChatGPT scares me in that sense. You can get people to say things that they didn't actually say and put it out there as if it, even in their voice from the sounds of it. But the lust of the eye, by the way, I'm teaching Paradise Regained right now, simultaneous with this. It's about the exact same thing. The three temptations in the wilderness. The lust of the eyes, Denethor, if you recall, looked at the steward of Gondor looked at the seeing stone and saw the future that was coming and knew that they were going to lose. And that led him to a sort of terror and defeat. And when I say it's called the lust of the eyes, it doesn't seem like lust and enjoyment. It's more of a sense of, because I can see it, I know it, and I know its outcome. It's sort of the problem of empirical science, actually. Believing that a material thing that you see in front of you will betray everything that comes with it. But what Denethor says is, the west has failed, it shall all go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash and smoke blown away on the wind. And then he does what Sam didn't do. He decides to throw away his own life at that point. He throws himself on the funeral pyre out of despair. Very pagan act to commit. Just like, who does this in the tradition of the West that you would know best? Dido. Right? She throws herself alive on the funeral pyre. She's seen the future. Her whole city will hate her. They'll turn against her, her enemies, and so forth. So she gives up her life, throws it away. This is the lust of the eye, in a certain sense, coming to its ultimate outcome. One final thing is the reference to the pride of life. Pride of life is exhibited when we think that death is the end of life, and don't see as a life beyond the death. There's no purpose in life but to die. And I'm going to quote here, and who's this? This is Ralph Wood. He says this. He says, if we had no prospect of dying, we would commit the two evils that undermine the good: pride and despair. Pride that we will always have time to do the things that we ought to have done. Despair that we will never cease doing the things we ought not to have done. The creation is good, Tolkien affirms, precisely because it is mortal. It becomes evil only when we seek to deny its mortality, either by extending our lives unnaturally, or else by wasting the time that has been accorded to us. And so Gandalf says all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. So don't squander your days. Don't squander your hours. Right? The time has been given. And so it says in Ephesians, look carefully how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. Note, so the mortality, which is the thing that men are subjected to, is meant not to be a curse, but a gift. And to try and gain power over it, that's what men are tempted to do, to avoid death. But death is the thing that's going to destroy sin, the death of the Lord, of course. But death is not to be avoided at all costs. Well, that's what modern eugenics seeks to do. AI, transhumanism, etc. It's doing exactly that. And it won't use it for virtue either, but solely out of the pride of life. Tolkien speaks against this repeatedly. And those who try to preserve their own life for no other end than preserving their life. Anyway, I'm finished with that for now. I think I've run out of time. I have run out of time, in fact.